Yng-Ru Chen. I am here from New York from a company called snark.art, and I'm here to talk to you about the creative potential of the blockchain and why artists are using it from their perspective. And I'm from the art world, so I am the least technical person, probably speaking at TABConf this weekend, but I do know more than most art people about blockchain, but if you come and ask me really technical questions, I'll defer you to my colleagues. But hello from the art world. I'll give you a little bit of a background about myself. I work with artists like James Clark, who's a great artist at the intersection of art and technology. I have done press and marketing for museums, such as MoMA PS1 in New York. And I've worked at Sotheby's as an art specialist, particularly in Chinese works of art. You'll see here there was a dish that was sold for $33 million. That was my life. And I left that life to really work on artists and helping to sustain their practice, because there's this misperception that the art world is just full of money, and that's probably because of what we read in the newspaper and what we read in the media. You'll see these are press reports just from 2018. The Leonardo, the quote-unquote Leonardo sold for $500 million. Artists who are still alive are making almost $100 million. Banksy, who everyone here seems to know that the rest of the art world actually despises, self-destructed this work at Sotheby's. If you want to talk about that, we should talk about it, because to me, what he did was the last thing from self-destructing his work. Sotheby's is now parading this destroyed work of art around its spaces in London and other places. And the owner actually was pleased because it now is worth more than it was. So that's the art world that you hear about, but there's a difference between the primary market and the secondary market. So everything that you see that is reported from Sotheby's or Christie's, that's the secondary market for the most part. That's artworks that have already been in the trade, have been exchanged between owners, and what you get in the United States is that artists don't get any of a cut from a secondary market sale. So it really impacts the livelihood of artists and how they can sustain their living, especially since so many artists live in very expensive cities. So I'm here to talk about why snark.art is vital to an artist's market, primarily the primary market. And this is just a quick statistic that I pulled from an organization called the Creative Independent, which is part of Kickstarter. They did a survey last year to ask artists to give them a real picture of what their lives are like as artists. This is just one statistic. But for the most part, artists need to have many other jobs just to be artists. And again, this is part of the secondary market issue where they're not getting any revenue from sales. And this is also because people don't value art as something that they should spend money on, except if they're the 1% of the 1%, and you want the Basquiat or the Warhol, or the things that have the kind of immediate cachet. But most artists are not living that way. And even artists that you know from museum shows, they are not living in this kind of grandiose lifestyle. So this is a very real picture, and I have more statistics if you're interested in that. So artists need new alternatives, and that's what we're here to talk about with Snark. Snark was founded just this past year, and it's a lab. We're working in collaboration with contemporary artists to make a new artistic medium using blockchain. And we feel very strongly that artists are often the best innovators of new technologies. They're working with things and materials and mediums that most of us don't even consider to be artistic materials. Jackson Pollock was working with house paint. He was too poor to afford real oil paints, but we need to think, artists are always thinking outside the box. And what snark.art wants to do is work with artists to help push the concept of blockchain beyond cryptocurrency. And so the first collaboration that we worked on launched in late November, and the artist is Eve Sussman. Eve Sussman is a badass. She's a woman who lives and works in Brooklyn, and I'm going to have her tell you a little bit about herself here.
My name's Eve Sussman, and I'm an artist and a filmmaker, and I'm doing a project with snark.art. About 15 years ago, I created a video work called 89 Seconds at Alcazar that was inspired by Las Meninas, the Velázquez painting in the Prado. When I created the piece, what I really wanted was sort of to be a fly on the wall in the salon in the Alcazar where Velázquez painted Las Meninas. And so that meant having to actually rebuild that room, to create the room to scale, to study the architecture, to find these scholarly art historical documents that actually showed you the floor plan of the palace and where people might have been in the space. And then to actually figure out how a camera could be a fly on the wall and circumnavigate that room. 89 Seconds at Alcazar has toured all over the world. It's in museum collections in different countries. And it's been shown a lot. And at some point, I sort of thought, oh, well, the piece has perhaps been shown enough. Maybe this is it now. We can put that piece to bed. And then Michel and Andre from snark.art came to me and said, do you want to propose something? And it suddenly dawned on me that what made sense to propose was a reimagining, a re-envisioning of 89 Seconds at Alcazar into what we're calling 89 Seconds Atomized. And so we're actually shattering the piece into over 2,000 pieces, blocks, 20 pixels by 20 pixels, and creating a version of it that can be acquired by up to 2,304 people and be kind of almost a community artwork. Video makers for a long time have worked in the tradition of photographers and printmakers in that they editioned their work. And that was a way partly to make a living, that if you made a limited edition and you sold it as a limited edition, you could potentially make a living from selling those limited pieces. The problem was that they were limited, and that is often something people complain about, you know. How do I get to see it? Where is it? How come I can't own it too? How come it's sold out? So making a 89 Seconds Atomized, a blockchain artwork from my original piece, 89 Seconds at Alcazar, is a chance to turn the piece into something that is owned by a community. So it's a whole new way of thinking about how a limited edition can be acquired and what can happen with it and what kind of life it can have. The creation of 89 Seconds at Alcazar was about kind of trying to go deeper into the frame. Like, can I actually step into that room and be a fly on the wall in the room? And then can the camera fly around that room? And now the creation of 89 Seconds Atomized is sort of taking yet another step deeper. Instead of stepping deeper into the room, we're sort of stepping deeper into the pixels. We're stepping deeper into the structure and the foundation of what makes a piece run. And so that, to me, is kind of an extension of what was going on when we originally created the piece, which is, how do you get further inside it? How do you get inside the picture? Because I was one of those kids that always took stuff apart and couldn't necessarily always put it back together. But with blockchain, I'm actually guaranteed that it can get put back together. The responsibility of having to get put back together is suddenly not on my shoulders anymore. And so even in this studio, you can see how there's a lot of stuff I've taken apart. And you know, I always think, I'm going to get back to putting it back together. And then somehow you never get around to it. And so there's sort of this relief that, oh, I can shatter this thing apart, and it'll miraculously get reassembled because of the power of the blockchain and because of the power of the community that own it. And they will take responsibility, or I hope they will. That's the experiment. But I'm excited to see if that experiment's going to work.
So as Eve mentioned here, her original video was based on the world-famous painting by Velázquez, which was painted in the 17th century and was considered really one of the first selfies. Velázquez painted himself into the portrait of the king and queen of Spain. And it's really kind of haunted artists forever. Picasso painted, dozens of versions of it. Degas, all the painters that you know are inspired by it. Eve is the one who created a video medium based on it, and now we have a blockchain version based on it. So this is just kind of a rendering of what she thinks might happen if the Atom owners for these particular screenings that you are allowed to request at will from the community, if there isn't 100% consensus, which we assume will be the case for these screenings. You can, when you own an Atom, which will live in your digital wallet, you don't have to comply and agree to loan your Atom for a few days. So if you don't, it'll look incomplete, and that's what interests her, actually. She doesn't want this work to be a complete duplicate of the original video. So here are just some basics about 89 Seconds Atomized. We're selling each of these atoms for $120. They're 20 by 20 pixels. So they in themselves are these abstract digital pieces that you will have in your digital wallet. And you can purchase with crypto or with credit card. There are 2,304 total atoms, and each atom is a unique work. So this is not fractionalized ownership. You are not just buying into a painting that lives in some storage space that you'll never see. You actually do get to possess this work itself, but this work is part of a larger piece. Each atom is based on the ERC 721 standard. It's dependent on the community to piece it back together. And this is very exciting news. We're screening it for the first time at the NFT.NYC conference at the PlayStation Theater in Times Square on February 20th. So if any of you are going to be in New York at that time, let me know. If you might need a ticket, let me know. I might be able to help you out. So just some other projects that we are also working on that are in the pipeline. There's a work called The Bible by an artist, Tommy Hartung. He was included in the last Whitney Biennial, which is one of the most important exhibitions of Neo-American art. His work is also in the collections of the MoMA, the Hammer Museum, other incredible museum collections. The Bible was also sold out, and he's giving to snark.art his artist proof. And he's creating a remastered extended version for our platform. And it's based on a lot of things that happened in recent times. He was really looking at people that were concerned with surveillance and our government. But it's going to be split into chapters, so each owner will be able to own a chapter, which will be about a 2-minute segment of the piece. And this is actually a quote that I pulled from his Vimeo page of the original Bible video, and I thought it was really kind of interesting because it sounded a lot like a community that might want, a kind of a blockchain community. But he said, the Bible is a multi-dimensional worldwide network of networks in which users at any point in the world can connect information with any other user and sometimes talk directly with. So I'm really excited to show you guys what this will be. This will launch probably in mid-March. And then there's a curator that we brought on board who was recently at the Guggenheim Museum, and she's brought on a designer architect named Omid Kumvari, who's a British-Iranian architect. And he is working on these mathematical geometric elements that are based on ancient Persian philosophy. And this is just an example from Uzbekistan, but this is a rendering of what he wants to do. So each of these ribs really are part of a larger whole. And what we're going to be doing is selling each of these individual elements on the blockchain, on snark.art, so you can own that work and be part of a larger community to bring it all together. This piece was accepted into the London Design Biennale a few years ago, but he didn't have enough money to make it happen. So in a sense, this might be a version of crowdfunding to help an artist realize an actual piece and make it reality. Here's another example of what it might look like as you walk under the pavilion. and each one of these individual structures that comprise the whole will be owned by people on the blockchain. And Sarah gave me this quote the other day that I thought was really nice from an art world perspective. Blockchain has immense potential to shift how we think about collecting practices. This model transcends and cuts through so many hurdles affecting transactions between artists. And as I mentioned earlier, artists are, for the most part, they need new alternatives. They need new ways to make their work happen and to fund their work. There are kind of the traditional foundation models of applying for a grant, getting it, and hoping the money is enough. And then there are ways of getting a private donor or having a gallery pay for it. But for the most part, artists are not making a ton of money from what they want to realize. So with people like Sarah and with partners like snark.art, we're trying to just create a new revenue stream or revenue model for artworks to be made. One interesting development that we are happy to announce, you guys are hearing it first because it's going to be announced on Wednesday, but there's a company called Artsy, and Artsy is really the largest art platform worldwide. All the major galleries sell through Artsy. They also have something called the Art Genome Project. Basically, any work that is of relevance in the art world is featured on Artsy. Artsy has invited snark.art to be its first blockchain gallery partner. So we will also be able to showcase our artists and the work that we're doing with them on Artsy, which then bridges that gap to the art community, which is in many ways a little bit skeptical of what blockchain is able to do. So please check that out in a couple of weeks. We have a great newsletter called The Hunt, and it's not just about Snark, it's really a compilation of the week's best news on art and technology. We're really trying to, garner a larger community that is interested in this intersection, because everything from AI, VR, AR, all of these things, artists and museums are interested in, they just don't really know how to approach it for the most part. So again, this is another effort to try and bridge that gap. And this is me. Email me, check out our website. I'm also out there for the day, so I'm happy to talk to you and tell you more about why I think the Banksy stunt was terrible and tell you about the crazy life of the art world. And I don't know if I have any time, but I'm also happy to take questions. 5 minutes? Okay. Yes?
Hello. I also am coming from the art world, and particularly filmmaking and media making, and ran into the same problem. So I teach students, and seeing them think that they're going to make $1 million by being a director, and realizing that that's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. And then I moved into entrepreneurship for media because I realized that they needed a better business sense. Mm-hmm. And the film world was an anomaly, like the art world. But now I posit and question, now that we're moving into the gig economy, mm-hmm. isn't everybody a freelancer and an independent worker? And so really, I think all of us are working on trying to raise money to realize our vision. And so I don't really know what's the difference between an artist and a person who's creating a blockchain or an entrepreneur or a startup. And I just question this. That's all.
Question. I agree with you. I think artists and people working, independently on blockchain projects, for example, there's so many parallels. And anytime we've had conversations, we're good friends with the guys from CryptoPunks. They come sit with us at our space every once in a while, and they're not artists, right? But they actually think very similarly to
experimentalists.
Yeah, you should see how they get on with Eve Sussman. They love each other, and I think that there are some artists who I mean, look, you can't, it's not a monolith. Like, artists are all different, and, you know, people in this world are all different too. But in terms of how you just sit at your desk or your studio and try and create the next thing, it's kind of similar, because there is no path, you know? You are forging your own way forward, and you just hope people support it. But, you know, we've actually spoken with some people in the film industry as well, and I definitely think that, you know, that's a partnership that we want to try and establish at some point soon, too.
I think the difference is compensation. Artists don't get compensated, because my husband's an artist, and they're always starving. So these other people are compensated. Their level of income is closer to, you know, what their economic value is, whereas this gives, like she said, the secondary markets where people make money, the people who buy and resell. So this, I think I understand. They're trying to put it back in the pocket of the artist.
I think that this is sort of the edge.
Yeah.
Things are happening. So having it where derivatives, micropayments, smart contracts, all of that, you know. So musicians are in the forefront of figuring this out, in my opinion.
Right.
But I think that, and that's why I posit, like, the data that goes onto the blockchain, that's a piece of art, and you get to determine, you know, whether it has a derivative or whether you know, you get royalties by every time it gets sold, which was a question asked yesterday, or whether, but, you know, so it's very much about labor too. So I'm very interested in labor, and, like, is an artist's labor the same as computer, you know, programmers' labor? Is it work for hire? You know, and so really, we're really talking about knowledge.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just find it really fascinating.
It is fascinating, yeah. Thank you. There was another question.
Thank you. So I've lived it. I went to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, stayed on in Chicago for 3 years, worked as a bouncer, worked in the kitchens, and finally gave up because I couldn't make a living doing it. And, you know, that school is in the top, I'd say, 5 schools in the United States. And they even told us, I think 97 or 92% of you will not make a living making art. So this is important, and I'm just wondering how someone would propose a work to be hosted on Snarks.
Well, so thank you. I mean, and obviously Snark is not the only company doing this. I mean, in terms of the way we collaborate with artists, I think it might be pretty singular. You know, the work that we did with Yves Sussman, for example, took a good chunk of 2018 because we're really the co-producers of what they're trying to do, because these artists aren't coming to us with the technical expertise about blockchain, and they understand the concept, but we're then working on the development of it on our end. So we're really at this point not set up to take on new projects besides kind of the ones that I mentioned. I mean, there are a few more that we are trying to work out. For example, there's a poetry project. I mean, honestly, speaking of artists who make no money, you know, I mean, poets are it. And we were even thinking about, like, how, you know, the publishing model is really sad right now. So how do you create an ecosystem where people want to actually buy poems? And I was like, when was the last time I bought a poem? You know, I see them for free on the New York City subway, and you can read it on the internet, but you might buy an anthology for $10. But, you know, there's just so many economic questions on how we have to change the mindsets for purchasing art or consuming art. But for you, I mean, I would just, you know, just stay in touch, because we do want to do a lot more. We're just trying to, you know, understand, like, getting on Artsy, how that will affect the market. We sponsored one of the art fairs at Art Balls in Miami Beach in December, and we were like 1 week old. And, you know, it took me about 45 minutes to answer anyone's questions about blockchain, because you have so much to explain to the art community. So I think, you know, the more artists who kind of understand the concept, great. That obviously helps us kind of get ahead of what we would originally have to do, which is explain the fundamentals of blockchain. But after that, it's just more about, coming up with really novel, interesting ideas that push the envelope on how we consider blockchain to work in our lives. Because to me, it's more of this like underlayer of technology that will be around. It's not just going to be like blockchain. It'll be involved with, like we already understand with supply chains, with like how we shop, how we do all sorts of things. That's kind of the goal here too, is to figure out what are the best use cases or interesting use cases for blockchain. So we don't really want to duplicate what Eve did. We've already done that. So if you have interesting ideas that might be workable on a tech level, pitch it forward, but we're not formally taking submissions. Yeah.
I think that's all the time we have.
Okay, thank you everyone.